Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be making this summer skirt. It's a two-tiered mini skirt, has an elastic waistline, super easy and very quick to make. The fabric that I'm using is gauze, purchased from Hobby Lobby. I only use 1 yard, but if you are an extra large, I would definitely advise 1.5. Here are the things that you will need. Subscribe, share, like, and let's get started. The very first thing we're gonna do is grab tier 1 with the right sides together. We are going to pin the side seams. Now here, I'm not adding that many pins. I think I only added like 4 on each side. That's my puppy, Mr. Thunder. Go ahead and do this for tier 1 and tier 2. Make sure that the right sides are together. For this gauze fabric, the right side and the wrong side both kind of look the same. So I kind of just left it how it was originally folded, and I just added my pins along the edge. Once you have tier 1 and tier 2 pinned at the side seam, then we are ready to sew. Just to make sure we are on the same page, tier 1 will be attached to the side seam of tier 1. Tier 2 is going to be attached to the side seam of tier 2. You're not pinning them together, okay? So bring it over to your sewing machine, and now you're going to sew that seam allowance as a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you are on your straight stitch. You're going to back stitch in the beginning and back stitch in the end. Repeat that for all 4 side seams. Once you are done with the side seams, the next thing to do would be to clean that raw edge. If you have a serger, you can go ahead and serge that raw edge, or convert the machine into that zigzag stitch and just simply zigzag over the edge. I didn't think of that during the process. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to convert it into a flat felt seam. So you can follow along here, or you can just skip into the next step. The timestamps will be down below. So for the flat felt seam, once you've created that first seam, you're gonna trim your seam allowance. I trimmed it down to about 1/4 inch. And then what you need to do is iron it. When you iron it, you keep the seam nice and clean. For the gauze material, never press down and move the iron up and down, because you can lose your little shape, the little designs that the fabric already has. So just press, lift, and then move over to the next section that needs to be ironed. But now that it's ironed, you are going to pin it down, and then you're going to sew right across that. This time your seam allowance will be at 1/4 inch seam allowance. The goal for the flat felt seam is to encapsulate that raw edge into the seam itself, so that nothing is showing and it's not going to unravel, because it's nice and secure. This method is usually used for chiffon material. I can't think of any other material that it would be used for. I think sometimes they use it for jeans, but it's a little bit more complicated when you're using it for jeans. But yeah, that's what I ended up having to do for mine. You don't have to follow it, just use the timestamps down below if it's not something you're interested in. And in her place, a new self was made. I'm in between. Now that both side seams are complete for the tier 1 and tier 2, we are going to move on to create the actual waistline. Grab your seam gauge, and we're going to measure at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have 1/4, iron that upper edge all the way around. I love using the seam gauge. It definitely helps expedite the process when sewing, because you don't really have to add that many pins, since you are already, it's kind of like you're preparing it, you know. It just simply expedite the process. Now, If you want to use your pens and add 50,000 pens, and by all means do what you have to do, but I definitely like ironing as I go. Once you've ironed down the upper edge, what you're going to do now is fold it again at 1 inch and 1/8. Add some pins to secure it in place. Since technically this is a double fold, I started using my pens because I noticed that as I was measuring, if I didn't keep it in place while the fabric was still warm, I was losing the creases a little bit. And this section here is important since that's going to be the actual casing for your elastic. So you need to make sure that that spacing is correct. I brought this over to the sewing machine getting ready to sew and realized that I put all of my pins backwards. But it's okay, I'm committed, so I'm just gonna rotate that garment around so that we can get this stitch going. All right, so for your casing, for the elastic, you're gonna line the needle to the edge of the fabric, to the folded edge. And when you start, make sure to back stitch. You're going to continue that stitch all the way around. Make sure that the material is not shifting on you, which is the importance of the pins. It stabilizes it and secures it in place. But once you've made it all the way around to the other side, leave a 2-inch gap and make sure to back stitch so that you have an opening for your elastic to go through. Be sure to only sew the seam at 1/8 inch away from the folded edge because you want your elastic to be able to maneuver through it and to get all the way through without getting jammed. A girl, a woman, both in my soul, learning to balance, learning to be in the struggle. I find the real me. So now we are going to bring the garment over to the table and we're going to grab our elastic. The elastic measurement will be your waist measurement, and overlap it with 1 inch so that you can stitch it together. Grab your loop turner. The one that I have is kind of like a tweezers, is able to grip onto material. So once I grip it onto the elastic, I pull the ring down, and then from there you simply insert it. If you don't have this tool, you can always use a safety pin in order for you to maneuver it across. Be careful when you are doing this step because sometimes the elastic can rotate within the casing and we don't want that. So be gentle, at the same time be aware of the position of the elastic. The goal is to make the elastic to go all the way through without allowing that back end to get lost inside the casing as well. So take your time with this process. The days turn heavy like an unseen rift. The girl that I was began to fade, and in her place a new self was made. I'm in between. I'm not quite a woman, both in myself. Learning to balance, if in the event the elastic rotates, just make sure that you are rotating it back so that everything is in proper position. As you get closer to the end, as you can see here, I added a pin just to secure it onto the fabric so that it doesn't get stuck inside or get sucked into it. Now that both pieces are out, you are going to overlap them and pin them in place. Bring the elastic in the body of the garment back over to your sewing machine, and you can just simply add a straight stitch and back stitch onto there so that it doesn't come apart. What I did here was sew while the pin was still intact. The pin was to the side of the needle, but if this is your first time sewing, definitely don't do that. Add your pins sideways because the needle can actually hit the pin and it'll break. So I don't want you to do that. Do as I say and not as I do. Okay, do as I say, not as I do, is what my professor used to say. So just be careful. Best practices is that you put the pin sideways. Once you sew back and forth and you back stitch, now you are ready to fully encapsulate that elastic into the casing. Learning to be, find the real me. Bring it back over to the table. This is going to be your last chance to make sure that the elastic is not rotating. But once you pull onto the side seam of the top of the skirt, it should allow everything to be nice and even. So that would be your best way to get everything to fit. Now what you're going to do is add some pins so that we can close off that casing. Bring your material over to the machine. Now the sewing machine I have, it does allow me to remove that bottom section, storage section, in order for me to have better leverage. I like to remove that whenever I am doing any elastic around a circumference of anything, really. Whether it is a thigh or a cuff, I'll take that right apart just so that I can have better leverage. You are not going to be able to back stitch here. So when you are starting, line up your needle a few stitches back onto your original back stitch so that you can sew over that. Sink your needle into that stitch, and then from here, you're going to pull the material forward while your other hand is pulling that material backwards. This will allow everything to lay nice and straight. You do not want the fabric to have any gathers there, because you'll want to be able to make that straight stitch and line it up with your previous stitch, right? So take your time here, be easy, and do not go into the elastic. From here, we are going to add some stabilizing stitches in order to keep that elastic from rotating within the casing. Change your stitch type to zigzag, and you can expand your stitch length to a 4. And from there, the width of the stitch, you can expand it to 6. There it goes, at 6. And now you are ready for your zigzag stitch. This part here will be a little bit tricky, but just like how we did it before, what I want you to do is sink your needle in first, and then you're gonna pull your material forward, that way it's nice and flat, and zigzag stitch across your elastic. When you stop, make sure you sink your needle, straighten out whatever needs to be straightened out, stretch that fabric back again before you start sewing. You do not want to sew those gathers closed, otherwise you're going to lose the elasticity of your garment. But if you stretch it and you add your zigzag stitch, it all gathers back up and it allows you to, stretch the material. Always remember to sink your needle before you stop, because if you don't sink your needle, that material will gather and will shift out of alignment from where you stopped. All right, y'all, this is what it's looking like so far. I'm loving it. And you know for sure that elastic is not going to be doing somersaults in that casing like them sheen dresses or skirts, because Lord knows I hate it. But it's looking good, and we're going to move on to the next step. Make sure your notches for your center front and your center back is intact. And we're going to switch that machine over to your basting stitch. Your length needs to be at a 4, and you're going to move that stitch type back to your regular straight stitch. In order to create those 2 basting stitches, all it is 2 rows of stitches about 1/4 of an inch apart. So the first one, make sure your thread is nice and long. You're going to create it at, I did a 1/2 inch here, but you can actually just do 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge. And you're going to do that twice, 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge and another 1/4 of an inch from your first stitch. That way you have 2 complete rows of basting stitches. You need to do this for the top of tier 2, and you're going to do this all the way around. When you get to your side seam, make sure you stop and you allow the thread to hang long. You do not do this basting stitch over your side seam. Now that your basting stitches are done, you can bring your garment back over to the table. My seams are, not my seams, but my threads are in a loop, because normally what I do is simply extend the thread, and then from there I keep sewing so that I don't have to start over. So it's just a little trick that I've learned along the years. But you're going to put your top threads together and your bottom threads together. What I mean by that is your needle threads will be tied together and your bobbin threads will be tied together. This allows you to pull the thread at the same amount for the top and the lower seam or stitch line, so that the gathers move in unison. There are times where the thread is uneven, and you'll see that you have more threads for the top stitch than you do for the bottom stitch. And that is because those gathers, they're not moving in unison. So it's important to have that, otherwise it gets a little wonky in the end. But now that you have your threads tied, just hold one set tight and slowly start to maneuver the fabric along the stitch line. And you're going to do this a little bit at a time until all of the fabric is gathered. Once it is nice and even for the front and the center back, you are going to match those side seams. Because I have a flat felt side seam, it will cause some bulkiness. So what I'm going to do is rotate one of the side seams to the front while the other is turned to the back. That way they are not overlapping each other and causing bulkiness at that side seam. From there, you're going to pin your center front together and your center back together. And then at that point, you can move those gathers into place so that your fabric is in perfect alignment. So that tier 2, which has the gathers, is in perfect alignment with tier 1. Make sure that before you start pinning that right sides of tier 1 and tier 2 are together. That way you have access to sew onto the wrong side of both. This part is important because you can easily sew it inside out, and taking that stitch apart will not be easy since you have a basting stitch there and gathers. Once it is all pinned and secure, you are ready to start sewing. Now adjust your sewing machine back to your regular stitch length, which is between 2 and 3, and on a straight stitch. And your seam allowance for this will be at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Technically, you should be sewing at that bottom stitch that you created for the gathers. I personally like to keep the flat side towards the body of the machine because sometimes those gathers, they will fold and twist and move out of the way and move in the way. And then as you sew, you realize, once you're done, you realize something's shifted out of place and now you got to take that stitch out. So I like to be able to have the visual. That way, as I sew, I can maneuver and flatten those gathers out of the way, and I'm ensuring that it's laying flat in how it's supposed to be.
Come a little closer, I wanna dance with you. Everything's moving slower, I don't know what it is you do. I've been looking at you all night, trying to figure you out. I just wanna make you smile. Hold your hand in my hand, looking at the sunset. Man, you're looking good tonight.
I got so excited and wanted to see how this thing was fitting, and I'm like, I'm just gonna take it off really quick so I can take a look. Now obviously that seam that we just created needs to be ironed, so it's a little bulky there, but so far it's looking good. I like the length. I don't need to do anything extra to it in order to like add an extension or something, but so far I like it. I like it a lot. All right, y'all, let's continue. Okay, so bring your garment back to the table. Remember how earlier I said I did not have enough thread for me to serge? Because technically you need 3 rolls of thread that matches that color. I only had 1 orange. So if you are in that same boat, what we are gonna do is trim off the excess for the seam that we just created. That way we can remove some of that bulkiness. And what you can do is add a zigzag stitch over that raw edge in order to have a clean finish.
There's no one else here that kiss you before the sun goes.
When you bring your garment back over to your machine, you need to change your stitch length back to a 4. Stitch width needs to be at a 6, and stitch type will be at a zigzag. What you're going to do is zigzag over that raw edge. Take your time with this process. Make sure the edge of your garment is actually falling in between the zigzag. Keep an eye on your fabric underneath. Make sure it's not folding over and you're not catching it. And also ensure that your needle is not passing the stitch line that we just created. Okay? Do that all around. And when you get back to your starting point, you can always backstitch there, even though it's zigzag. Just be careful so that nothing's getting tangled, and take your time with the process. Once you're done, we can move on to hemming. Actually, no, we have to top stitch and then we hem. If you have not ironed, right now before going over this next step would be the best time to do that. But that zigzag stitch is like serging, you know, you keep it over that raw edge, it keeps it in place. And that's what it's looking like so far. So in order for you to add that top stitch, you're going to make sure that your seam allowance is moving towards the waistline and it's not folding down. You want it to fold up towards the waist. As you go, move your hand over the material to make sure that it's not twisting. Make sure to keep it nice and flat, and you're going to top stitch all the way around. It's always best to start at a side seam. That way when you go over it, it's on the side. It's not really going to be noticeable that there's like, you know, double stitches there. But honestly, when you're wearing a garment, who exactly is looking at the stitches, you know? Not unless it's like contrasting colors and something really goes off. So I think you'll be fine if you decide not to start at the stitch or at the side seam, but it's just good rule of thumb to know that that's usually your best place to start. That way visually it's not, you know, so apparent. From here, we are going to iron. That way we hem. Using your seam gauge, just as before, you're going to fold your material at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then again, you're going to fold it onto itself at 1/4 inch. I did use pins here. I kind of refrained from ironing only because this gauze material is like the more you iron it, then those nice little crunchy, I don't know if that's the word for it, but the design that's on the material tends to go away, and I like the design and I don't want it to go away, so I limited myself in ironing. But definitely iron your material if you have it. It'll make life a lot easier.
Ran through the days in the sun's warm way, but somewhere along the road I felt the shift. The days turn happy like an unseen.
And just as with any seam, I always advise to start with your side seam. When you are hemming, line up that needle to the folded edge, the upper folded edge, and you're gonna sew all around the perimeter of your hemline. For your seam allowance, it's gonna be at 1/4 and 1/4. And for your side seams, make sure you trim if it's bulky, and make sure that the top tier side seam is in alignment with the bottom. Like, if it's going towards the left, then you want the bottom to go towards the left. If the top is going towards the right, then you want the bottom to go towards the right. Take your time. Here I actually went over, and I have a small little gap, so I didn't take that stitch apart. What I did was I went back, started a few stitches back, and I just went over it again. The area is so small that to me it's not a big deal for me to take it apart. It's just going over that stitch and continue on until I was done with the garment. So if that happens to you, you can do that. The material that I have, I really refrained from picking at it, only because I feel like I would totally just destroy the type of fabric that it was, since it's technically gauze. I'm going to be going to DR, and I want extra little lightweight garments. I have a feeling it's going to be super hot down there, and I want to be prepared.
The days turn heavy like an unseen rift. The girl that I was began to.
Now that you have completed your hemming, this is the final result of the skirt. Remove any random threads that may still be hanging on. Grab your snippers. This is the best time for you to iron. Clean the inside as well as the outside of the garment. This is what the waistline looks like. Your elastic is not going to be moving anywhere. I need to iron the hem, that's why it's giving that bacon look. And this is what the inside looks like. We zigzag stitched those tiers, and we also top stitch them so they're not going to come apart. And over here we have the flat felt seam and some random threads. The flat felt, I have one tier going in one direction and the other the opposite, just so that it can lay flat. This is your waistline. Turning it inside out. It looks good, y'all. It looks good.
Not quite, girl.
And y'all know I like to show how it looks on me. This is the final results here, paired with the beautiful crop top that we created a few weeks back. I'm definitely gonna make more of these little mini skirts. I live in Florida, and y'all, it's always hot. But subscribe, share, like, comment down below if you have any questions, and I will see you on the next one. Happy sewing.
The real me.